It's the Blue Angels History Night, a night I'm sure we've been looking forward to for a long time, with special guest retired U.S. Navy Captain Gil Rud. Gil graduated from NDSU in 1966, but prior to that he's from Portland, North Dakota, not Mayville, just in case you were wondering. I was told that's important. He joined the U.S. Navy in May of 1967 and then entered flight training and earned his wings already in December of 1968. Following that, he flew more than 50 combat missions in Vietnam, serving as commanding officer of his squadron. And in 1986, Gil earned the rare distinction of being selected as flight leader and commanding officer of the Navy Blue Angels. He became one of the very few Blue Angel bosses ever to serve past the normal 2 years, when he was asked to stay on as the team transitioned to the new F-18 Hornets. Following his Blue Angels assignment, Captain Rud served as commanding officer of 2 Navy ships, the last being aircraft carrier Constellation with 85 aircraft and a crew of 5,000. I can barely keep my 3 kids in line. Wow. After 28 years of service, Captain Rud retired from the Navy and he joined the commercial aviation industry with McDonnell Douglas, where he was in many management positions in California, Hawaii, and Norway. Following a merger with Boeing, he became a manager in the development of the new F-18 Super Hornet. There he played a key role in bringing in the new plane online under budget and ahead of schedule. That's very impressive. Gil retired from Boeing in 2009 after a distinguished career in the Navy and the aviation industry. He served as a volunteer in many organizations, and we are so lucky to have him here. That's serving in the air show as well. Plays a key role in that. We're lucky to have him in the Red River Valley. So without further delay, here he is, goofing off back there. Mr. Gil Rood.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. I'm a little disappointed because I was told that I was going to be able to get to sing that song instead of just sit and watch it. You know, but I just took a picture of this crowd out here, and I sent it to my wife Carol in San Diego, and I said, babe, would you ever in your wildest dreams believe that there were this many people would come out to see this little old Norwegian? And you know what she said? She said, I'm sorry, Gil, but you're not in my wildest dreams. Okay, well, we're going to have some fun tonight, and while we're doing it, we're going to talk a little history of the Blue Angels, and we're going to do it right from the beginning. I was lucky enough to be the boss in the 40th year of the Blue Angels, and I got to meet the guys all the way from the beginning, from 1946. And so the first airplane that I got up here, by the way, what we've been doing all that time, 6,000 air shows, if you believe that, have been flown, 76 years. The Blues have been in existence, and we've been pursuing the perfect air show. We haven't got there yet. Brian Kesselring is working on it right now as we speak, but we just keep on trying, and that keeps us the best in the world. So, 1946, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Nimitz at the time, he said, he called down to the Chief of Naval Air Training. He said, we need to keep in the forefront here so we can get money. It was right after the Second World War, so we got to make sure people understand that carrier aviation is out there. How are we going to do that? Well, he said, maybe we should have a flight demonstration team. Okay, make it happen. So he says, he looks around, he finds Butch Boris, a 26-year-old Navy ace who shot down 8 Japanese airplanes already. And he gets him and he says, Butch, he said, how about putting together a flight demonstration? And he said, well, what would you like? He said, oh, you figure it out. That's kind of the way the Blue Angels operate. You know, autonomy of command, you figure it out. So Butch goes, he gets 3 other guys, all of them World War II pilots, flying this airplane right here, the Hellcat. The Hellcat was a tremendous fighter. The Wildcat was the first fighter that was used early in the war. It was good, but it was not, it couldn't keep up with the Zeros, really. And so Grumman came out with this one, the Hellcat. The kill ratio of this Hellcat against the Japanese was 19-1. Okay, and when the Japanese did shoot it up, it was built so well that oftentimes it would make it back to the ship anyway. So Butch took this airplane and he got a piece of paper, probably a bar napkin, and he did all these maneuvers on it, and then he brought the other guys in. He said, you think we can do this and survive? And they all go, yeah, I think we can. So they did, and that started the Blue Angels, but they didn't have a name. Okay, and so how do we find a name? Well, one of the guys said, hey, I was in New York last week, and I went to this supper club. It was called the Blue Angel. And they said, that's it then, we'll be called the Blue Angels. And that's how it started. That same year, a new airplane came into being, the Bearcat, the F-8 Bearcat. Now, the F-8 Bearcat was much smaller and faster than the Hellcat. The Hellcat was 360, 370 miles an hour. The Bearcat was 430 miles an hour. Had a little bit bigger engine, and as you can see, it's all engine. You know, very little airplane and mostly engine. So, they said, Butch, you got to go up there and pick up 4 new Bearcat airplanes, and you need to go to the Grumman factory up there in Long Island. And he goes, okay, so they flew up to Long Island. They got these brand new airplanes, and they were all painted up and everything. They jumped in them, and they were flying them back to Florida, but they needed to stop for gas in Norfolk, Virginia. So on the way, they got to Norfolk, Virginia, and they came in to brake and around and everything, and they got on the downwind. He puts the gear and flaps down, and he realizes he has no trim at all. He can't trim the airplane. There's not going to be able to land it. So he tells everybody, clean your airplanes up. We're going to circle around overhead. And he calls the tower, and he said, hey, tower, how about making a phone call to the Grumman factory, to the engineer, and say, you know, hey, what's wrong with these airplanes? We can't land them. And the guy said, you know, I already talked to them, and they just said, they called back and said, you are all grounded. So he goes, well, yeah, well, we're not on the ground, but well, how did we get there? Well, they figured it out. They had to land about 20 miles an hour faster than they should have and whatnot. And it was a CG. They'd taken the guns out and stuff of the airplane, and nobody had bothered to check the center of gravity on the airplane. So that was a colorful start to the Bearcat. Okay, so let's go next to airplane. All right, this is the F-9 Panther. The F-9 Panther was the main Navy airplane used in Korea. In fact, the Blues went to this airplane in 1950, and then during Korea, they disbanded the Blues and put them all into a fighter squadron called VF-191, the Hellcats. They went to Vietnam, and unfortunately, the flight leader then was Johnny Magda, and he was killed during a strike in Korea. But I'm going to talk to you some more about people who flew this airplane. And there was a guy named Dale Crow who eventually became a Blue Angel in 1953 when they came back from the war. And he was just a 23-year-old lieutenant junior grade, and he was with his flight leader flying this airplane, and they were making an attack on Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. And they were in there, and his flight leader ran into a cable. They were that low coming in, and he ran into this cable, and it broke his windscreen and blinded him. Now he couldn't see, so he pulled off the target, and Dale Crow got underneath him and talked to him and stayed under him and bumped his wing and stuff to keep him flying level, brought him back to the aircraft carrier, helped take him down low enough to where he got a little bit of vision when he got back there, but only peripherally, so you have to look sideways. And anyway, Dale took him all the way in, and he made a safe landing. Just an incredible Navy Cross type thing, second highest award ever. And so also with this particular airplane, a fellow named Royce Williams, friend of mine, still with us, 97 years old. In 1952, he was standing the alert on the Oriskany, and they were in the Sea of Japan. Terrible weather. I mean, just terrible. Snowstorm, rough seas and everything, overcast. And they tell him, he said, uh-oh, we just see a bunch of MiG-15s coming down from Vladivostok. Not North Koreans, Russians. Okay, it said, well, we don't want them to pass over the ship without an escort. So they launched Royce and his wingman. They climbed through the overcast. He climbed up. He saw these shiny, nice MiG-15s up there, which was a heck of an airplane, a dangerous airplane. And so he looked at him. He said, well, we'll join on him. And they turned toward him and started shooting at him. So he goes, oh, you're going to shoot, do you? So they engaged. 20 minutes of air combat. 7-2 to start with, but his friend or his wingman had a problem with his airplane, had to go back to the carrier. So it was him against 7 MiGs. He shot down 4 of them. Okay? 4 MiGs down, and then he ran out of bullets. So he went into the overcast to get away from the rest of them. went back, landed on the ship. When he landed, they found 230 bullet holes in his airplane. It wasn't a one-sided event, but his airplane was built better than theirs. So they can't say anything because they're Russians, right? I mean, we're not at war with Russia. It could be World War III. So what happened was the admiral said, okay, we can't say anything about this, but we're going to go to Tokyo. So he takes Royce Williams to Tokyo. And they actually go to the Sanyo Hotel in downtown Tokyo, and they go up to the suite at the very top of it, and they walk in, and there's President Eisenhower. And he's standing there, and he goes, well, Royce, congratulations on shooting down them damn Ruskies. He said, and of course we can't tell anybody, you know, because we don't want World War III here. And also, he said, we can't tell anybody because the NSA was listening to the Russians the whole time, and we don't want them to know that we have that capability. So we can't give you any big award or anything like that, but what we can do is celebrate. And he said, so I have the finest scotch here in the world. How about a glass of scotch? And Royce, who's 22 years old at the time, said, you know, Mr. President, I'm from Kentucky. I'd really like to have a bourbon. Ooh. So the president frowned at him, got his aide, said, get the kid a bourbon, will you? And Royce says now, he says, you know, on second thought, I probably should have taken that scotch. Okay, so next airplane. Okay, that's an F-9 Cougar. Now, I'm an old guy, and I'm so old that I flew this. We actually were flying this in the training command. And the difference between this and the Panther is this is a frontline fighter, too, but this is a swept wing airplane, which means that instead of, it flies tremendously airborne. But getting it airborne and getting it stopped when you landed, that was a real adventure. So the single seat one of these, I remember landing these in Beeville, Texas, to where we would touch down, we'd do a little aerodynamic braking, drop the nose, and literally stomp on the brakes to try to stop the thing. It was one-to-one mechanical braking, and it would take about 8,000 feet to get the thing stopped. But it was a great Blue Angel airplane and used very well. Now, during all this time, you might wonder, well, what was the safety record? It was awful. Okay, we killed 20 pilots in the first 40 years of the Blue Angels. And when there's only 6 of you, those are really lousy odds, you know. And so a lot of that was due to the fact that there wasn't a lot of leadership. There were just a bunch of boys out there, kind of aerobatic cowboys, really, for most extent. But it got better over time, and we'll talk about that. So let's go on to the next airplane. Okay, this is the F-11 Tiger. Now, the F-11 Tiger was never used in combat. It was just kind of in between wars when it came out, but it was a beautiful airplane. And it was the first afterburner airplane. So it really had some power, and it had very little gas. But there was a guy named Jack DeWinter who was a solo pilot during this era. And he was out in Iowa, and I can't remember the name of the town now, but they were flying the air show there. It was kind of out in the country, and he finishes the mover, he gets over the side, and his engine quit. Just cold turkey quit. He goes, oh my goodness, I can't get back to the runway, but I want to jump out if I don't have to. So he looked, and there was a little runway, or a little country runway out there. It was way too short, but he said, if I can get it in there, you know, maybe I can get it stopped. So he brought it in there, and he lands, and of course, he couldn't get it stopped. He's going too fast. He goes off the end of the runway. There was a nice big road there. He goes off on the road, and he ends up in a gas station. Yeah, he ends up right there, and he's trying to get his breath, and he opens the canopy up, and the kid that was running the pumps there kind of walks up there and looks at him, and he goes, well, kid, what are you waiting for? Fill it up. You know, I'm not sure if that has been exaggerated or not over the years, but you gotta love Jack, and he's gone now, so as far as I'm concerned, it's true. Okay, this is also the airplane when I first checked in 1967 into AOCS, and I went through that gate. If you can imagine this, you know, you go through that gate and you go, wow, there's airplanes around and stuff, and then 19 years later, I legally flew upside down at 100 feet over that same gate in a blue airplane. You know, so that's amazing. Okay, next. Oh, the F-4 Phantom, the Phantom II. Wonderful airplane. Great airplane, used extensively in Vietnam as a fighter bomber. One of the few airplanes that was used by both the Air Force and the Navy. Now you may wonder, why don't they have more airplanes that they both use? Because the Navy airplanes have to be sturdy enough to land on an aircraft carrier without a flare. Basically a controlled crash. 700 feet a minute right on down to that deck. Whereas the Air Force has a nice flare, long runways and so on. But this airplane was actually used by the Marine Corps, Air Force, and Navy, plus a lot of other countries. At one time in 1972, toward the end of the war, think about this, McDonnell Douglas built 72 of these a month. A month. This is amazing. I mean, the most Hornets we've ever built is 4 in a month. You know, so this can be done. Of course, these things were also about 800 grand instead of 40 million. You know, makes a little difference too. Okay, so this airplane though was not a good Blue Angel airplane because a couple of reasons. One, it was big, really huge, and it was also not easy to fly in formation, and it used an awful lot of gas. And so in 1972 rather, we lost, we lost 8 F4s in the Blue Angels, just in the Blue Angels, okay, and 4 guys were killed flying during that time. So guess what? The word was out, you Blue Angels are done. You know, you don't need to exist anymore, and boy, it was a dark time in the period. And so how do we fix this? Well, a bunch of ex-Blue Angels got involved, and they said, first of all, we got to get a different airplane. And then secondly, instead of having the flight leader be one of the boys, basically, he is going to be 10 years older than the rest of them, and he's going to already have had command of a Squadron at sea, okay, before he even takes over the Blue Angels. And so in that regard, things changed. Tony Les was that first guy, and guess where he flew one of his air shows? Fargo. That was the first Blue Angel air show, and it was flown in the A4 here. I think it was 75, was it, Dick? Yeah, 74, the first years. And so anyway, the A4, let's go to the A4 there. Oh, that gives me shivers just looking at that. Okay, so the A4 was like strapping on a really hot motorcycle, you know. It was like a party. I felt like my arms would go out and they were the wings, you know. Just that, and some of my buddies from Portland sat in the cockpit, you know, when they went down there, and I know they felt the same way. But this airplane, it was a 700 degree a second roll rate. If you can imagine that, you snap the stick over and it would do 2 complete rolls in 1 second. It was a tremendous airplane for air show. It was small, it was easy to fly in formation, and so it lasted for several years and was basically pretty safe. But the one maneuver we did, which you see up there, is called the 6-plane delta landing. Oh, it was the dumbest maneuver we ever did. I mean, because if you think about it, as the flight leader, if you look at that picture up there, you will see that the back row, the 3 guys in the back row back there, 4, 5, and 6, they're going to land first. Then 2 and 3 are going to land. And at that point, for you jet jockeys out here, you're going to know this. At that point, I'm going to suck the power to idle, dump the nose, touch down, and tap the brakes at 150 knots. This is all bad stuff. You do not want to do any of those things in a normal landing. The reason I did that was so they could stay with me and make it look like a formation, full formation landing. And so we had emergency chutes on the A4. So if I touched down like that and I blew a tire or needed to use a chute, I would have to go, boss needs a chute, back row chutes, 2 and 3 chutes. Now I could use mine. By that time, I'd more likely be out in some field somewhere. But it never happened, but I had so many bad dreams about that, you know, this occurring. This was really a tough maneuver to do. In Fargo here, the runway is 150 feet wide, and we can do only 200-foot wide runways. But anyway, that's something that I do not miss about the A4. So, my first year as the boss, what do I get to do? I get to take the Blues to Fargo, North Dakota. Oh boy, that was fun. So we come up here a day early because Dick Walsted and Daryl Schroeder and the boys had put together this awesome schedule of events for all the enlisted people and everything, including fishing and what else did we do? We did water skiing, all kinds of stuff. Shotgun shooting, you name it. And so they just have so much fun, so we came in on a Wednesday instead of a Friday, or a Thursday. And then, of course, we had a get-together at the Dalrymple Farms, who would eventually become the governor out here at Castleton. And so, surprise to us, we drive out there and they stop us about a mile from the farm. And there are 6 giant Steiger tractors. 6 of them sitting out there. Biggest tractors in the world out of West Fargo at this point in time. And so we each get on those, we start them up, and there were 2 of us that were farm kids, me and Donnie Cochran. We got to solo them, go by ourselves, and the other 4 guys, city slicker boys, they had to have a co-pilot with them as they went out. And we taxied those things. Our plane captains had lined up parking in the farm there. We taxied those things or drove them in there and swung into parking. It was just, it was amazing. And so then I start to introduce the crew, and I look out and I see my old coach, baseball and basketball coach and science teacher, Ron Peterson, who was one of my heroes. And he had retired, and now he helped run a dealership in Hatton, Northwood area there, John Deere dealership. He had trailered down a 1938 Model A John Deere, which was the first tractor I ever drove. At 10 years old, my dad had said, when you can start them, you can drive them. Okay, I got to figure that it was a big flywheel, you had to turn to do this, and I was just a little squirt at 10 years old. But the hired man came in the yard, and when he did, I knew it was hot, and I knew when the engine was hot, it was easier to start. So I went out there and flipped the petcocks and got that thing going, and I took one turn on it, and then of course I didn't drop the darn thing. So it fired off and boom, right into the dirt I go, And I take my little body off of that, get on that tractor and drive it around, and what I didn't realize from then on, I was a contributing member of the farming team. So he remembered all this, and he brought this Model A John Deere, just like the one that I first started, and he said in a very loud voice, "Gil, you may be able to fly an airplane, but I'll bet you can't remember how to start a Model A John Deere." Well, I got my sister, who was the absolute worst tractor driver in the entire state of North Dakota. I got her to help me. We went out there and we popped the petcocks and give a little choke, a little throttle, and turned that big flywheel, and she went put, 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 we drove that thing around. It was one of my best memories ever. Okay, so then we come to the air show, and we take off and fly the beginning of the air show, and here comes a massive thunderstorm. And man, it comes in 40-mile-an-hour winds, everything. We had to land and run into the building over here and stuff. And then one of my guys said, "Boss, the people are still out there." And I said, "Well, yeah, it's just a small thunderstorm, North Dakota tough. They're going to be out there." He said, "Come on, we got to fuel them up and go again." It's the first and only time I know of that the Blue Angels have started a show, made it canceled because of weather during it, and then gone out and flown again. But that was Fargo, and we just had a great time. The next day, we went into brief, and we had the FAA guy with us, and he came in there, and we were briefing with the Happy Hooligans, our good buddies here that they were flying F4 Phantom 2s. In fact, their air show was every bit as good as ours, and a little on the wilder side. And the guy, that Colonel J.D. Nelson was the head guy. And he's in there, and here comes this FAA guy, right, who we let in our briefs. And he comes in there, and he has a sheet of paper, and he shakes it in J.D.'s face, and he said, "Colonel, if you fly that air show you flew yesterday, I'll be forced to give you a flight violation." And J.D. grabs the thing away from him, and he looks him in the eye, and he says, "If you don't stop waving that in my face, I'm going to shove it up where the sun doesn't shine." So, North Dakota tough, Okay, so next. Okay, this is the 1987 team, and this is going to be on the cover of my memoir, which is coming out, a little bit of advertising here, coming out here later this summer. And this is as close as you can get with new airplanes here. And our transition was a bit on the shaky side because we did it all within about a year's time. We learned a lot in quick time, but we froze the team, okay? So we had the same guys as in 1986, because we can't have new guys and a new airplane. Same thing goes for Brian Kesselring right now down there in Pensacola. As last year he did the same thing, and the good news is that the 2 North Dakota boys ended up getting 3 years as a flight leader instead of 2. So we worked that out. We're good, yeah. Okay, one quickie on this one, that's Grand Forks. We did an air show in Grand Forks with the F-18. And so we landed in Omaha, Nebraska to get some fuel. And now we take off and there's a giant thunderstorm between Omaha and Grand Forks. So we got to climb over it. Well, we can go really high. Airliners normally go from about 33,000 feet to 37,000 feet, and in that area, maybe 31 to 37. Well, we climb all the way up to 41, 43, even 45. So in this case, we're climbing out in a group of 6, and we're checking in with Minneapolis Center. So I called Minneapolis Center, and I said, Minneapolis Center, Blue Angel 1 with a flight of 6, level 430. And the little sweet voice comes over on the radio and it says, Gilman, is that you? Can you imagine the 5 guys behind me? You know, we're at a different freak, and I go, oh, boss has got a girlfriend in Minneapolis. Yeah. It was Marshall Okay, she was a controller, and she was from a little girl from about 2 miles up the middle fork of the Goose River, and she was, you know, so this is Marshall. I go, okay, we have a little conversation, you know, and anyway, of course, I'm good friends with her brother, Mad Dog, and so that just only happens in North Dakota, right? So then we cancel instruments, we go down, and I said, I'm going to fly over my hometown. So we come over to the hometown, and we're going, 400 miles an hour or so, coming through there, and I go, okay, guys, take it in. All right, get ready, smoke on, smoke off. And they go, what's the matter, boss, we miss it? And I go, oh, that was it. Yeah. Okay, so then we continue up toward Grand Forks, and now we're getting close enough where we can really get low. And I called Coach Peterson, and he had people, and some of you guys may have been there, they were in combine hoppers and whatnot, and we flew right over the dealership at 200 feet. So they could almost touch our airplanes as we went in there. Just some wonderful memories from that time frame. Okay, so at this point now, we have 1 airplane left. That's a brand new one that we're flying as of last year. And ironically, it was 34 years since the last transition. And now is the next transition, and unbelievably, that both transitions have been led by North Dakota natives. Okay? Yeah. One ugly Norwegian and one tall, handsome basketball player, awesome dude, Brian Kesselring. So, Boss Kesselring, have we get him on? There he is. Oh, here he is. Oops. Get that.
Aviation is never volunteer for a night landing at the boat. You can never have too much fuel and never get a story contest with Boss Rood. You're not going to win. With that, I'll tell you what, it's fantastic to be here. As Boss has already said, I'll tell you what, it's surreal for me to even be here. Think back to June 21st, I think it was 1986, being a 9-year-old kid out there watching Boss Rood and the Blue Angels flying over Fargo, North Dakota, the Fargo Air Show. That is a surreal experience to be here and be introduced yet again by Boss Rood. I'll tell you what, the most amazing thing about that was not only the flying, but Boss, the fact that I think we're 16 years old when we made that team, right? With that, we just the last year we started out with the F-18 Super Hornet, and we also did the C-130J Super Hercules. And both of those platforms are the premier platforms of both the Navy and Marine Corps. We've got the Super Hornet, which is out there right now. The vast majority of the preponderance of our naval strike fighters on aircraft carriers flying right today. And the C-130J, commonly called Fat Albert, Blue Angels, is the premier logistics platform for the Marines. And I'll tell you, we had a great time in the transition process. One, because this kid right here has had the ability to reach back to the person that I looked up to my very first air show. But we look back and we look to reconnect with all teams to include the 1987 team as they transitioned to the Hornet. Reaching back to Boss Wheat and his team from the F11 to F4, the F4 to A4 transitioned with Boss Labs, and most certainly the 1987 team as we transitioned into the Super Hornet. And as Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. We found ourselves a lot of times leveraging off of all the expertise that was laid upon us by the 1987 team. We looked to follow their pathway going forward. The Super Hornet is a fantastic aircraft. It's got a lot more thrust. It's got 33%. It's just simply 33% larger. It's a lot more redundancy. So it's a fun aircraft. One thing that you got a chance to hear about is some of the Blue Angels kind of how the flying that we do. One of the things that that inside the Blue Angels when we tighten up our formations is the air pressures from each individual aircraft actually push on each other significantly. Almost like if you were driving down the highway, you hit the steering wheel into the truck driving next to. That's how the Blue Angels are. What we found with the Super Hornet is it did a whole heck of a lot more. Hey, it's a cool aircraft, it's big, and all that, but we found that we pushed on each other a lot more, so that was something that was interesting. Also, we took a look at a lot of the maneuvers that we were already doing and seeing how we could kind of change that a little bit. And one of the things that we could do with the thrust, specifically the increased thrust that we have in the Super Hornet down low, and its acceleration in that kind of the lower airspeed regime from maybe 200 to 500 knots. It's got great acceleration there in that transonic, that subsonic regime. We found ourselves being able to slow down a lot of the maneuver entry speeds. As an example, one of our maneuvers, what we call the diamond dirty loop, and that's a loop we keep our gear and our hook down, kind of highlight the big name stuff that we do, catching that tail hook. Catching a wire with that tail. If we go and do a loop over the crowd, we slow that thing way down, almost 100 knots, so we can keep it real low and real tight to the crowd. That's kind of a cool thing that we're able to do. And we kind of did that with all of our maneuvers in the Super Hornet. So that's something that's kind of cool. And much like Boss Rood, boy, did I ever have a treat in my lifetime. I had no idea what's happened, but to be able to come back to the Fargo Air Show just last year, to be able to perform on the first year at an F-18 Super Hornet over my hometown in Fargo, North Dakota. Greatest state meeting, I'll tell you what, that was absolutely awesome, and I still think back about that and absolutely tickled with that. Can't believe I'm actually addressing you at this function here tonight. So again, it's awesome to be here. Thanks for the invite. I'm over any questions, but I'll kick it back to Wall Street. He's a much better storyteller than I am.
Yeah. Thanks, boss. Some of the stories I've told tonight are true. Okay, so we got another one of these we're going to put out in the crowd. If somebody wants to ask questions, we can do that. Here you go. Yeah. And while that's going on, we'll do one other story about us having a chance to meet President Reagan. Okay, this was in 1988, and we had a chance to spend some time with President Reagan, and for any of you who know, he's exactly in person what he is on TV or anything else. He's just a laid-back, nice guy, okay? And he was supposed to be with us for 15 minutes, and when the chief of staff came in and said the president of Pakistan or somewhere is out here waiting for you, he said, "Let him wait, I'm with the boys." And so when we were about to leave, he looks at Senator Howard Baker, who was his chief of staff, and he said, "So Howard, wouldn't it be cool if the boss here led the boys over the Rose Garden tomorrow morning and send me off to see Gorbachev?" Well, when the president said, "Wouldn't it be," boom, people are gone to make this happen. And so the next day, we go, how the heck are we going to find a rose garden? It was raining, it was terrible weather, maybe 800-foot overcast, and we took off out of Andrews, and they had shut down Washington, D.C. Ironically, the Reagan National Airport now, it was just National Airport. Nobody was flying. We flew right down that runway, and I said, "Where is the rose garden?" And a guy with my guy on the far right away said, "Boss, don't scrape me off on the Washington Monument." So we went over this thing at, I don't know, 350 miles an hour and about 400 feet, and the chief of staff had said to me, "Boss, tomorrow when you fly over, don't fly directly over the president. 6 airplanes, 400 feet, 400 miles an hour, of course we're going to go right over the president. The Rose Garden isn't even as big as we are." And so we did that. It was a heck of a thrill to be able to do something like that. And then we went on to fly the graduation of the Naval Academy, whatever, after that. But those are the kind of opportunities you get in this to do. So it really is something. Okay, questions? Yeah.
Next month at Ellis Air Force Base in Rapid City, the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds are both going to fly in the same show. How often does that happen?
You know, not that often. We always fly a practice show together. In fact, Boss Kesselring can talk to you about what they did this spring out in El Centro. Go ahead. You hear me?
I'll tell you what, we had an opportunity the last 3 years to invite Thunderbirds out to El Centro, California. That's really where we cut our teeth in our winter training. We start out in Pensacola, certainly, for the first 2 months. It's flying twice a day. When we get out to El Centro, you're flying 6 days a week. And you're alternating 2 or 3 flights a day, briefing, debriefing, pretty much. It's a bit of a grind, but it's good. That's how we put the show together and first get the stage and then get to entertain later on from that. And what we found that there's really only one other team that tries to do what we do, and that's the Thunderbirds. And I'll tell you what, going back to Boss Conway had an idea back in 2020. It's like, hey, let's get these teams together, kind of that doldrums that we get into at the end of our winter trainings, and see if we can learn something from each other. And what we had an opportunity to do is bring those two teams together the last 3 years for about a week at a time. And they come out there towards the end, right before we get our FAA certification and our own service certification, obviously for the Navy and Marine Corps, as well as the Air Force. And look to get that, look to share best practices and all that. It's a heck of a good time. It's really close to the public, so really all we do is get together. It's just 2 teams kind of knocking it out and doing demonstration after demonstration or practice rather over El Centro. So that's been fantastic. It's something we started. We're looking to continue. We just selected the new Blue Angel boss for 2023, 2024, and they've got a new boss from down the Air Force as well, the Thunderbirds, and they're looking to see if we can continue that going forward. Now that said, DoD instruction mandates that we can only do show together once every other year. For this sake, it was McGuire Air Force Base that canceled due to some extenuating circumstances, so we replaced it with Dover this year. We're actually only by ourselves here up in South Dakota next month. So Dover will be the joint show with the Thunderbirds this year. But we had a unique opportunity to do a lot of operations with the Thunderbirds, and really it comes down to a lot of different factors. Really, COVID was the driving factor. You know, our first flight demonstration, the first thing we ever did together with myself was what we called Operation America Strong. What we did was fly over some joint flyovers of major cities and metropolitan areas, both together in a single formation as a tribute to first responders, medical personnel, essential personnel that are fighting on the front lines of the COVID-19 fight. And you put yourself back in 2020 as a military guy who's usually out there being able to kind of put the stick it to the enemy. You want to talk about feeling helpless as you were going through that. I tell you what, it was an awesome thing for us to be able to do our part to kind of support those folks out there. And we did a lot of that. And I'll tell you what, I think I got a few gray hairs flying over New York City and Philadelphia, Fort Worth, all that, and dodging bump jumpers and helicopters while you're flying 2 formations together. But it was a heck of a lot of fun. It's something we had a good time with, and also basically forged our teams together and made some great relationships that we continued on over the last couple of years. Last year we did a few shows together just because there were some cancellations around the nation, so we actually did 3 joint shows last year. And again, we're going to do 1, maybe 2 this year. So it is very unique and very chance to see us both together at the same shows. So I think in the future years, it's going to go back to that cycle every other year together. So maybe 1 here in 2023 or 24 is our next show together. But you have a chance. It's a pretty fun thing to go watch. It's get the Blues in the morning and you get the Thunderbirds in the afternoon, or vice versa, depending on the show you're at. So probably a long answer there.
Yeah. Perfect. So I will tell you that we are friends, good friends, but we also pull a lot of pranks on one another, okay? So I was in my very first show in A4s, had not flown a Blue Angels air show yet. We go to Luke Air Force Base. It's our first show. And we're out on the flight line out there, and everybody's kind of nervous, especially me being the first-year boss. And if the boss has a bad air show, of course, everybody does. And Grizz Watson was our former football player with the Green Bay Packers and the Tennessee running back. he was worried that, you know, I would be too nervous and that sort of thing. So we start the brief, and bang, the door flies open on the ready room, and in jumps this incredibly beautiful belly dancer. And she runs in there and jumps up on the table and begins her dance up there, you know, everything. And I looked over at Kurt Watson, and he was white as a sheet. Because he was saying, oh my God, now our boss is going to be totally screwed up and we'll have a terrible air show. But really, it relaxed us, and we did just fine. But those types of things go on pretty much all year. Okay, so Dick, remind me now, we've done the air show here 12 times out of, how many? 14 times out of 19, something like that. The Blue Angels have been here to do this air show, so they love it.
Retired twice.
Yeah, in 2009, the Blue Angel team, this is all the team now, not just the pilots, they voted Fargo as the air show of the year for everywhere, okay? Take a bow, Dick. Stand up, take a bow. There we go. Anybody else? Air show committee, up. So, yeah, there's quite a history there with, you know, the Hatton Flyers. And but we have a group of folks that are sort of FAA rebels. And I actually had a Aviat Husky. Some of you may have seen it in here a couple of years ago, the big tires and so on. So we left a little dirt strip in our cornfield one year, about 3 years ago, and then they all went to Oshkosh. Okay, so over to you guys first. All right, thank you. Enjoy it.